One of the techniques or one of the topics regarding dialogue that interests me, that I think that I saw you talk about, was dumping dialogue versus just kind of like real dialogue. So dumping of information. I don't know if that's correct, but yeah, just sort of like giving everybody everything they need right then and there, and it's too much. It's not breathing, it's not natural, it doesn't evolve.
Right.
So how can someone slow down without sort of just giving the reader or the audience too much information?
Well, the first thing you have to understand about dialogue is that it's got to be connected to the character's desire line in the scene. In other words, if a character has an objective, an intention in the scene, the dialogue has to match that intention. And what I see a lot of times, especially with exposition and information, is that a character is saying all that information, and you can tell that it's really the writer's objective. In other words, the writer wants the audience to know this information because they think, okay, the audience needs to know this and this and this and this, so the character is going to say this and this and this and this. And that doesn't work because scenes and dialogue are about a character's intention in the scene. Everything a character says is matched to what that desire line is. So anything that doesn't belong to that doesn't fit. And you can tell whether it's the writer wanting to know that information, wanting the audience to know that information, whether it's part of the character. I was trying to think of an example. So one of the best questions you can ask yourself for every single line of dialogue in your scene. So write the dialogue, first draft, just do what you want to do. Don't worry about that. But when you reread the dialogue, ask yourself for every line, why is that character saying this? Why is that character saying that specific line? Most of the time it will be because they're responding to what, so they're reacting to something, that's fine. But a lot of the times you will find that a character is saying something because you want the character to say that, not because the character wants something in that scene at that specific time. So you got to know what the character wants, and then every line of dialogue is a strategy for that character to get what they want. And if that dialogue is not that, then you rewrite the line until it fits that. Now, exposition, there's ways to make sure the exposition in your dialogue matches the objective. For example, if you know, I'm suspected of murder and you're the you know, detective who's asking me questions, right? And tell me, where were you? And I didn't commit the murder. Well, whatever I'm going to say is my desire to make you think I didn't do the murder. So there's a reason why I'm saying that line. I didn't do it. I was at the movies. Saying at the movies is exposition, but it's connected to my desire to convince you that I was not the killer. You see? So the exposition matches the objective of the character. You know, so there's ways to do this. There's plenty, you know, there's techniques to make sure the exposition is subtle, you know, part of conflict, part of your desire line, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of stuff you could do. But that's the lesson you really have to know. That's the most important thing. Make sure you know what every character wants in the scene. Make sure that what they say matches that objective. So I always bring out David Mamet, who's, you know, genius at dialogue, and he said once, nobody says anything unless they want something. So unless you want something, nobody says anything, because nobody's going to say, you know, hey, I'm a trustworthy character, right? I mean, if somebody said that to you, you're going to be thinking, whoa, why is he telling me this, right? There's always a reason. Why? So there's always a reason. And if we know what the reason is in the movie, if you know what the character wants, or you're trying to figure out what the character wants, that's more interesting than somebody dumping exposition, you know. Characters who just dump exposition, it's just boring because it's not connected to a desire line. Even characters who disagree with each other, even though that might be kind of interesting because there's some tension there, if we don't know what they want, it's going to be boring. So you see this a lot with amateur scenes of people like, oh, I need conflict, so my character is just going to argue, and so you have the people arguing back and forth, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just, right? Because we don't know what they want. And that's really what makes something interesting, is intention and obstacle to that.
We talked earlier about dumbing things down, which this is a different way of talking about it, but in terms of let's suppose it's a doctor speaking to another doctor, but they're not going to say.
They're not going to use Dr. Lingo.
Exactly, and they may say something that's grammatically incorrect. They may use slang. They may do They may. Right. It's not going to be this perfect.
It depends on the character.
Okay.
I mean, I like to talk a lot about contrast. So if you have two characters in the scene, it's really always more interesting if the characters are contrasted. So if a character is speaking in a formal way, so somebody who's an academic or a professor or a doctor and he speaks in a formal way, make sure that the person that he's interacting with speaks in a more slangy way or more contracted way, because that's going to make you're going to create that contrast. Just like in painting, if you want to highlight the color blue, you surround it with yellow, right? It's opposite. So it's the same thing with characters. A lot of the techniques in the dialogue chapter in the book are about individuality. How do you create individual voices? Because having all the characters sound the same is a very common problem with dialogue. It's usually the writer's voice, and Sorkin has actually been criticized for that all these characters sound the same. But when I talk about his dialogue and I show clips and actual scripts, I showed that he actually does individualize, and the characters sound different. So it's an unfair criticism, but you have to do that. It helps if there's some difference in character speech or cadence or contractions versus stilted writing, grammatically correct writing.
What if a character is speaking to themselves? What if they're thinking out loud? What if they're looking in the mirror?
That's
what if
fine.
they're berating themselves,
That's
driving?
fine, because that's really a character thing. As long as you keep it short, I mean, the problem I see is when it's too long. Then we're kind of wondering, okay, where's the conflict? What's happening here? I mean, it might be interesting, but even something that's really interesting for too long will disengage an audience after a while. So you could do it, just don't do it for too long.